Hasley and
Change this a little bit.
No, same.
North.
Riley, you have any pets?
Yeah, I
Okay.
had 4 pairs.
That's awesome.
So a couple things. I'm gonna give, this semester, I'm gonna give everybody their own copy of the test so people can write on it all that they want. So I did enough copies, so everybody will get one that they can write on. It's still Scantron, but then you can cross off options or whatever, okay? So all the tests are the same format each time. The first 50 questions are always matching in groups of 10. First 50 questions, so all the unit tests we have, right? The final's different, but all 3 unit tests, first 50 questions are matching in groups of 10. Matching, you can't really do a lot of analysis, right? It's mostly just like, here's the person, which theory did they develop, or here's the term, what's the definition, right? So the first 50 are like that. Then the last 50 are application questions primarily. There's a few identification questions in there, but, hey Emily. But mostly they're application questions where I give a scenario like, Riley and Emily are doing this. After they do this, this happens. What theory helps to explain this? Okay? So a lot of questions like that.
Yeah.
So the next unit test we have, chapter 6 through 10, will be the same thing. First 50 questions, matching groups of 10. Last 50 applications. The difference here a little bit from psych is that there's 5 options instead of 4. So instead of being A, B, C, D, it's A, B, C, D, E for the options. Okay? Let me pause and get some sugar in my system again. You ever drink too much caffeine and not have enough food and you feel kind of funny or not? That's where I'm at right now, so. I don't want to like pass out and hit the floor, although that would end up on YouTube for sure. Teacher eats it. But I would edit that out before I posted it, I guarantee you. Okay, do you guys have the sheet, the print off I handed out, the review sheet?
Oh, dang.
So can I get that?
Close it out.
Yep. It's in that stack over there. So anything that you're missing, sheets that you need, it should be in the lower half. There's 4 of them. The essay question, the study sheet, and then the brown, or the green and the orange. I should grab one of those so I have something to go off of too.
Maybe we should be her.
Is there an extra one over there? Okay, that's fine. I'll just pull it off the computer.
Oh no, I'm gonna do that one. Sure.
Okay, so like usual, not everything on the test is on the study sheet, and not everything on the study sheet is necessarily on the test. But if you understand everything on the study sheet, it can help you to understand things on the test a little bit easier. So for example, there might be a theory that's not directly the answer to a question or what a question's asking, but that might be one of the wrong options in a multiple choice question. So if you know what that theory is, it'll help you to better answer the question. Does that make sense? So I think that everything that's on the study sheet is at least on there in that format, but I don't remember offhand, okay? So you remember how I said the first 50 questions are matching in groups of 10? Those are kind of grouped by chapter, but then there's one that's like people, pretty much. So if it makes sense, remember, it's not perfectly this way because there's 50 questions and there's 5 chapters, right? But there's basically, there's an equal division of concepts from each chapter. I tried to make it roughly like 8 from every chapter and then roughly 8 people randomly put out throughout there. But the people aren't like randomly dispersed, they're almost all in the same group, okay? So if you've been paying attention in class when we do some of the activities or the study sheet and you look at the terms, or obviously like the analysis of Mean Girls, what's the focus for that? What's the main thing you're trying to find in there? You remember? You're supposed to find norms, so folkways and mores, whether they're implied or directly stated, that's the main thing that's discussed. So there's quite a few questions about that on the test. So terms related to that, concepts related to that. You know, we're doing that, it's entertaining, but it's also based off of a book that's written from a sociological perspective. You can turn your desk if you want, you don't have to sit like that the whole time. So, it's up to you.
I'm not too uncomfortable, but.
I'm trying to eat a little bit real quick too, but still give you some options, so.
Yeah.
Is there something specifically on the sheet you want me to explain first, or would you rather have me just kind of ask you random questions, or what do you think? Just ask random questions first and then at the end if you have, okay. Okay, so the key thing to understand in sociology is understanding the three main theoretical perspectives and being able to apply those in virtually every situation. So, in sociology, when you hear the question, what are the three main theoretical perspectives, everybody that's in sociology knows that they're referring specifically to the three main theories: functionalism, conflict theory, and SI theory. In the text, they refer to functionalism as structural functionalism. They refer to conflict theory as the social conflict perspective, and they refer to symbolic interactionism as SI interchangeably. So if you hear me say conflict theory, it means the same thing as the social conflict theory. If you hear me say functionalism, it's the same thing as structural functionalism. If you hear me say SI theory, it's symbolic interactionism, okay? So now, I'm gonna ask you a general question. I want you to tell me which one of the theories it matches with the most. Make sense? Okay. Which one thinks that stuff that happens in society is good for the operation of society? Functionalism, okay? Which one generally views many things that happen in society as bad? Conflict. So that produces conflict. The conflict itself might be difficult, but long term it's good because it's what leads to the changes. So it's like conflict sometimes in your life can be good with your family or with your brothers and sisters because it can bring about problems that don't get discussed. That's kind of how conflict theorists look about it. So I'll give you the name of a person. You have to tell me what theory they're associated with the most. Karl Marx. Conflict theory. What book did Karl Marx write? 1848. What book did he write?
Oh, wait. Oh, gosh. This was an English
Manifesto.
Yep. Manifesto is the second word of the book.
Communist Manifesto.
Communist Manifesto. So, conflict theory then is tied to what political theory? Communism. Which perspective is going to be more concerned about the meaning that people interpret social situations through?
Symbolic interactions.
Symbolic interactionism. Which perspective is referred to as a macro level perspective?
Conflict and functional.
Conflict and functionalism. So when I say macro, what does that mean?
It's like it's broad and like it looks at all
You read that,
factors
Rose?
of society.
Yeah, macro perspectives look at broad things and how those broad things influence the functioning of society. Good. So conflict theory and functionalism are the two macro perspectives. So if those are macro, SI would be what perspective? Micro, meaning they're going to focus on small groups more. They're going to focus on how two BFFs interact while they listen to Lil Wayne and laugh at people that walk by in the Commons during period 3 or something, right? Or talk about Lil Wayne or whatever, I don't know. They're going to look at that, and by analyzing that, they can understand how BFFs operate in other places. What are trends that they can see later? Macro level perspectives don't really look at that. They look at big institutions like schools or collectively the family, like all the families in the United States, or government or the economy, different things like that, okay? All right, when we talked about another major concept we discussed was culture. What is culture?
Our belief.
Okay. Beliefs. What else? There's 3 elements to culture we talked about. I wrote it on the board and had it underlined and had you guys look for pictures. In the definition, there's 3 parts to it, you remember?
You have to like interact, the interaction.
Behavior, the way of thinking, and then the material possessions of a people group. So all those things are interacted, right? Because the way you think, what you really believe is going to influence how you act. So if, who said, Matt and Sir Matt are the only guys in here, right? So if Matt thinks that Lil Wayne is what the ideal man should be like, all of a sudden he gets tattoos on his face and starts rapping horribly to try to get girls to like him, right? So if that's what he believes, and that's how, if he really believes that, I want girls to like me, I gotta get tattoos on my face and rap like badly, then that's the way, that's how he's gonna start acting, right? His beliefs are gonna shape his behavior. But then also, the physical things he buys, the way he dresses, the cars he drives, the whatever shoes he wears, all that, that's gonna stem out of that. It's all interconnected, right? It's all interconnected. Okay, so what's the difference between a value and a belief? What's the difference between a value and a belief?
Is your belief like a specific public value?
Yeah, beliefs are more specific. So in our culture, physical appearance is important, right? You guys agree with that? Media presents it as important, movies do. People, prom and weddings and all these ritualistic behaviors that we have involve some type of emphasis on appearance, right? So the value is that appearance is important, right? Beauty is important. The belief is what specifically is defined as beautiful. So take like 50s or 60s. Anybody ever watch old James Bond movies? Like Goldfinger, Spy Who Loved Me. Anybody ever watch those? They play them on TBS. Sean Connery used to be James Bond. Anybody know that? You know who the actor Sean Connery is? So he was viewed as attractive back in the day. Like girls would watch that movie and be like, oh, Sean Connery has his shirt off. If you go watch those movies now, he's not really that cut, like lean, and he's hairy. Like he's got a bunch of chest hair. So if you look at that now, the belief the value was the same, attractiveness is good, right? The belief about what is attractive has changed to be probably a little bit more muscular, more cut, and no crazy chest hair. Am I right? Ladies, crazy chest hair, is that viewed as attractive or not? Some of you are like, yeah, but there's no way you're saying it in front of everybody, right? So, like, yeah, secretly, Sean Connery, he's just really attractive. So, but do you see what I mean? The difference between a value and a belief there? Value is the, like, beautiful stuff is good. Belief is defining what is beautiful, okay? All right, what's the difference between a moray and a folkway then?
Folkway is more, like, it's more specific and more like, I don't know.
Okay. Katie, moray and a folkway?
Isn't the folkway, like, if you violate it, it's not as bad? Like, folkway is like the way you greet someone or whatever, and then moray is more like it's more important, I guess.
Right,
Like
so
casual interactions?
both of them involve norms. Both of them are types of norms. In short, mores are stronger than folkways. So greetings are often cited as folkways, but at the same time, you could violate a greeting method that would be violating a more. So let's say in some culture in the Pacific or wherever else, you meet somebody for the first time, you kiss them on the mouth. Let's just say that was the norm in that society. So then that person, whoever it is, comes to this society and they meet somebody, they walk into class, walk around and introduce yourself to people in class. Nice to meet you, and they grab their face and kiss them on the mouth, right? People would be like, what? Or they might push them away, or it'd be weird, right? It'd be not just a little weird, like you shook their left hand, not their right hand, kind of weird. It'd be really weird, right? So kissing somebody on the mouth for a greeting would be violating a more. Shaking their hand with the left hand, at least in this culture, would be violating a folk way. See what I mean? Okay? So that's just one silly example. The other silly example I always use is like guys in bathrooms with urinals, right? Find a mall, place that has like 10 urinals, the Fargo Dome, whatever. If you're a guy, because there's no stalls between them, right? If there's one other dude in there, go use the restroom right next to him and start talking to him. He's gonna freak out a little bit, right? You violated a more. A folk way is something that's not as strong, okay? All right, what is the difference between generalized other and significant other?
Significant other, you're closer to and like more personal than a generalized other.
Kind of. A little bit more. So, am I a significant other to you guys from the sociological perspective? Am I playing a role in like your learning, your socialization? Yeah, I'd say your teachers are significant others. Other people that are significant others might play a bigger role on influencing you than me, like your parents, obviously, but I'd still be included in that group. So the generalized other was a general term used for the collective influence of a variety of different norms in society. So it originally was stated by Mead. So it basically implies the widespread cultural norms and values that we look at, they influence you. You think about them and you're like, should I do this? Our society values beauty, so yes, I should. Should I do this? Yes, our society defines makeup as beautiful, so yes, I should put the makeup on, right? So you think about your behavior in reference to the generalized other, the generalized norms of society, and then try to evaluate whether what you're doing is good or bad. Okay, I'm going to give you some examples, and I want you to tell me if those examples express a manifest function or a latent function. Let's look at education specifically. In education, getting good grades so that you can get into a good college. Is that a manifest function or a latent function? Manifest. So helping students to get good grades, that's a goal of the school system, okay? How about basically providing daycare for parents that have elementary age children? That's a latent function because it's not one of their stated purposes. How about providing a means by which people can meet like their boyfriends or girlfriends? That would also be a latent function. How about providing a place where people could go to get substances they shouldn't be using, like cigarettes or alcohol or drugs? Is that a latent or a manifest function?
Latent.
Latent, okay? Are latent functions always bad? No. So you could go to college, meet somebody that you get married to there, right? That's not the stated purpose of the college, but it is something that happens because of colleges, right? So one thing that people often get confused with latent functions is that they think that latent functions are always bad from a moral perspective, and that's not always the case, all right? Okay, let's see. What's the difference between high culture, pop culture, subculture, and counterculture? Give me an example of all of those.
Subculture would be like the cheeseheads at like the Packers, wouldn't it?
Yep, so within the football culture, the cheeseheads would be a subculture. Good. Counterculture, high culture, and pop culture.
people who think they're vampires. Oh wait, that's another subculture.
Well, but are they also challenging some of the norms of society?
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's a counter.
so that'd be both a subculture and a counterculture, right? Make sense? Okay, and then how about high culture and pop culture?
High culture would be like fancy food, and then popular culture would be like pizza, like McDonald's.
Right. So high culture is what like the elite of society would have. So like Dom Perignon wine or whatever kind of, right? The real expensive stuff. Or like 500-year-old scotch or something. I don't know. That's high culture. Popular culture would be, probably shouldn't have used alcohol as an example, but popular culture would be like Bud Light or something, okay? So, make sense? So, you guys got that? We talked about that quite a bit. Okay, Freud's perspective on personality includes 3 parts: id, ego, superego. Which one is like the selfish part of the personality that wants immediate gratification? The id. Which one opposes the id primarily? Superego. Which one tries to balance the two? Which part is like your conscience? Or like, not your conscience, like what is conscious, what you're aware of? The ego, okay? Which one functions like your conscience, like your moral guide? Superego, good. Okay, give me an example of a total institution.
Jail.
Prison, give me another example.
Mental health facility.
Mental health facilities, give me another example. These often are related to mental health facilities, but like drug treatment centers, right? So what do all those share in common?
They try to make it so like the person is revamped.
Yeah.
Like isolated too.
Right. Isolate them, regiment what they're doing, and totally try to change what they believe and value. Okay. Okay. What's the difference between an ascribed status and an achieved status?
Scribes have birth. It's given to you at birth.
You have no control.
No, not necessarily. It could be, or
You're just giving it.
Yeah.
yep, you have no say in it. So for example, bad icy roads, you heard about the girls from NDSU that died in the car wreck, right?
Mhm.
So if one of those had like a kid, let's say, orphan, right? The kid would be an orphan now because they don't have a biological parent. That didn't happen to the kid at birth. See what I mean? So it doesn't necessarily have to be at birth. It could be something that happens to you later. So like cancer survivor, right? You didn't choose to get cancer unless you're crazy, right? Unless you're like, I don't know, I want cancer because I want to die kind of thing. There's probably somebody in this country that has tried that, right? Has tried to smoke till they get cancer, unfortunately. But so if it's something that you did not choose in essence, that would be an ascribed status. Give me an example of an achieved status then.
Teacher. Not like your profession.
Teacher, in most instances spouse, especially in this culture, unless you're in a culture that has arranged marriages. Boyfriend, girlfriend, athlete, etc. Good. Okay. Another guy that we talked about that had theories of personality was Jean Piaget. Piaget's theory are called often the theories of cognitive development or stages of cognitive development. What's the first stage?
Sensory motor.
Sensory motor, okay. So be aware of those stages. I'm not going to take time to go through all those, but you can look up. What's the difference between a status and a role?
Status is like what you are, and the role is like the behavior that's expected to go on.
Yeah, you hold a status and you perform a role. So a status would be like teacher, husband, spouse, father, president, high school principal, etc. A role is the expected behavior of that. So for a president, let's say, The president, they talk about the roles of the president in government class, right? They're supposed to be the chief diplomat, they're the commander-in-chief, all of that stuff. You guys discussed that in government, right? So the status would be president, the roles would be those other things. Their other role for the president is they're kind of the main representative for their political party, right? Okay, what's the difference between role conflict and role strain?
Role strain is on like a single group, like with one status, and then conflict would be with more than one.
Right, role strain is for a single status, role conflict is between statuses. So, like, as a teacher, I experience role strain often where I'm supposed to make classes challenging and make them hard for students, but also ensure that students are successful in the classes, right? So I want to challenge kids, but help kids to pass. That's my expected behavior. While making the classes harder usually leads to people doing worse on tests, right? So I experience some role strain there. Role conflict is like, I'm at school at 8:30 on a Tuesday and I haven't seen my daughter, and then I have to also go home and see her, right? So the status I hold of teacher is conflicting with the status I hold as father at the same time, okay? Okay, you guys get that? What's the difference between role set and status set then?
Status set is all your statuses, like you would be teacher, father, son, all that, and your role set would be all roles that you hold for like a single status.
Right, so status set is, for me, teacher, father, student, because I'm enrolled in a graduate program, all of those. The role set is the set of roles that I have for a single status. Good. Okay, in the first chapter it talked about ways to do sociology. Each one of these is tied to one of the perspectives, whether it's SI, conflict theory, or functionalism. So I'm going to tell you the perspective in sociology and you tell me which theory it matches with. So critical sociology, that's the study of society focused with what perspective? Conflict. So they're focused on finding things that are bad in society to try to change things for the better. Okay, positivist, which one's that tied to?
Functionalism.
Functionalism. They're trying to analyze, just explain what's happening. Interpretive then is tied to?
Symbolic.
Yep, the last one, symbolic interaction. So interpretive is trying to figure out the meaning that people attach to what they see. Okay, we talked a little bit about a researcher named Emil Durkheim. That was like the second day. Durkheim found that the level of social integration people had was tied especially to what behavior?
Suicide?
To suicide. So if you had more social integration or less, which one was more likely to lead you to commit suicide? No.
Less.
Less social integration equaled a higher likelihood that people would commit suicide.
Or social.
Because it's like the less people they're interacting with, right? So the more socially they were connected, the more people they had to interact with, the less likely they were to commit suicide. Okay, what does Eurocentrism mean? Eurocentrism.
It's what European culture, like, centering around European culture, like.
Right, so cultures that are focused on European values. So most like Western nations would fit that role. So Canada, United States, New Zealand, Australia, etc. We talked about a concept called the looking glass self. What does that mean?
Like how you want people to see you, right?
It's a little bit more than that. She's close, she's on the right track.
Isn't it like how you perceive yourself is how others like perceive you?
Right. So when you behave, you're constantly reading people, trying to figure out how they perceive you, and then you adjust your behavior accordingly. So part of it is what Caitlin said, like your view of yourself is largely based on how others view you, or at least how you think others view you. So, you know, a lot of high school guys, they want to be liked by the ladies, right? And if they think that the ladies like them, then they're like, yeah, I'm tough, I'm a cool guy, right? But if they think the ladies don't like them, kind of knocks them down a little bit. So it doesn't really matter necessarily whether the ladies do like them or not. What matters is if the guy thinks that the ladies like them or not. So that perspective, what really matters is whether or not the guys think that the ladies like them, not whether the ladies really like them. What perspective does that explain? What theorem is related to that? Another way to state that more specifically would be what's perceived as real is real and its consequences.
Thomas theorem.
W.I. Thomas theorem. Good.
What was that?
Okay, in the socialization process, what are important factors in terms of being defined as an adult? Like what things could happen to you that now you'd be considered an adult? Just think about it.
Like you turn 18,
Okay, you turn 18. Good. What else?
have kid,
Okay, have kids. What else?
get married,
Get married. What else?
Start your career.
Start a career. What else?
Have a house.
Okay.
Feel like
Outside of your parents, right? You don't live with your parents. Right? Right? What else?
What is that? Outside of our parents' house?
You got everything except for one thing.
like you pay your own bills.
Okay.
if your parents pass away or something, and then like if you're, well, obviously if you're not like 8, but like if that happened to like one of us, we'd be considered more of an adult then.
Okay.
You're second to all.
Yeah, the only one you really didn't state, but it's kind of tied to like moving out and getting your first job is finishing school, right? So all those things are important in terms of definition of an adult. Okay. We talked in the class about a couple different cases of people that were raised in isolation, like Anna and then Jeannie, right? So those are not like they did a study, they're like, what will happen to this person if we raise them in isolation? Those were severe cases of abuse. So in those instances, what did they find? Like what was one of the key findings of those studies?
They like couldn't develop socially after they were like released or like unable.
Right. So that suggests that there's what they call like a critical period, that once that point gets crossed, it's really hard to develop somebody totally. Good. So what was the key variable? Like what do they need in order to develop fully? What were they missing?
Like social interaction.
Yeah, social interaction with other people, right? So if you don't have that, people can't develop completely. Good. Okay, if you do research and the research is androcentric, what does that mean?
Does that focus on guys?
Yep, focused on guys or not considering females. Good. When they talk about cultures, comparing indigenous societies to horticultural or pastoral societies, what are some differences between their religious beliefs or religious life? I think like indigenous, like Native Americans, indigenous Amazon people, compare them to like horticultural or pastoral people. What are some general differences they see in their religious beliefs?
Like what women do in society, or like,
No, not necessarily, like think more about their theology, their religious beliefs, not like what people do necessarily, what they view of like spirits or God. What's the difference?
Like do they take it more like seriously? Like if you're,
No, not necessarily. So think like Native Americans or people that live in the Amazon versus people in a horticultural or pastoral society, like one that's based on farming or herding people. So like Middle Ages Europe or some other places.
Is it that like there's some of them have more, like they have more than one, like a religion, like I don't know how to word it. Like they have more than one thing that or like person they worship or whatever, and then there's ones that only have like one. Or is it?
Right, so indigenous, they focus on like spirits and like polytheistic system often. So they're more into like a polytheistic system in essence. Whereas the horticulture and pastoral societies aren't into that stuff as much. See a typo here I gotta fix too. Okay. When in the text they talked about dishonesty a little bit. What's one of the main ways we can detect if somebody is being dishonest?
Their body language, like fidgeting and stuff.
Right. Body language, good. Anything else?
Eye movement,
Huh?
like eye movement.
Eye movement, yeah, that'd be related to body language. Anything else?
Stuttering.
Yeah, stuttering, if they mess up what they say, good. Another big concept we talked about is humor. So, in order for you to get a joke, what do you have to understand?
Two beliefs that we said.
Yeah, the two different realities being presented. So Emily's joke that she told us in class, right? Knock knock, who's there? Eat my, and then Emily said what?
Eat mop. It's eat mop.
Oh, eat mop, sorry.
Yeah.
So eat mop, and then you say?
Eat mop food.
Eat mop who? So she's not really saying eat mop who. It sounds like she's saying eat my poo, like fecal material. So that's funny. Okay? It's funny because it's such an extreme reality difference. Okay? Good. Another thing we did in class is we played MASH. You guys remember that?
Mm-hmm.
So what did that help us to understand? Like when you listed how many kids you were gonna have or what you wanted to do for a living or all that
What's
stuff.
socially acceptable?
yeah, like
Right.
stereotypes and stuff.
Yeah, how social factors influence those things. Good. What's the key difference between SI theory and functionalism?
functionalism, it's like more, it goes more with how society works together, and then interaction, like, just how people talk and go about their ways.
Right, so functionalism is big perspective macro, SI is micro. Good. Okay, which perspective is going to focus on trying to explain how different things help society to be stable or survive? So which one's gonna look at how different parts of society work to help make society work? Functionalism, yep. Which one's gonna look at how those different groups produce conflict? or difficulties? Conflict theory. Okay, we also did an activity where I had people walk through the commons, either taking big steps, long striders. Who was a long strider in here? Anybody? Who walked backwards? Who skipped?
The karaoke.
You did the karaoke? Okay.
That was sideways.
So that comes from a perspective that basically says violate norms to try to see how people respond, and that'll help you to learn. What's that perspective called? Starts with an E. Ethnomethodology. Good. Which perspective, this is kind of tied to SI theory, which perspective basically says that we're actors on a stage? Dramaturgical analysis. Good. Okay, you start out and you meet some people in your 7th grade basketball team, and then later, by the end of the high school, like you always hang out with them and you always like to be with them and you're really close. You have problems, you call them up and talk to them. When you first met them, what type of group were they probably? Secondary, because it's more task oriented, you don't know each other that well. By the end of the high school career, what type of group were they? Primary group. Now let's say you all look at the Chicago Bulls to try to determine how you should act. What type of group would that be? Where you look at the older kids, when you were a freshman, you look at the older kids that are playing varsity basketball. What type of group would that be? The group that you look at to try to compare yourself and evaluate yourself to. Let's call it a reference group. Okay. All right, your basketball team versus Fargo North's basketball team would be called what?
Conflict groups.
No. Your group would be the in group, the other group would be the out group. Good. Another thing we talked about in class was conformity and things that influence and make it more likely that people conform. The 3 studies that really talk about that were Irvin Janis's research on groupthink, Solomon Asch's research on conformity in the line studies, and then Stanley Milgram did the shock studies, right? So in the Asch study with the lines, what did he find? Like, what was the big variable that he was assessing?
If people would go along, like if the wrong answer is being presented, if they would go with it just because everyone else would.
Right, so the pressure that other people doing the wrong thing would play in shaping other people's behavior. Good. What was Milgram assessing? What was the focus of his research?
Authority,
Yeah.
listen to it.
If people would be obedient to authority. What was Irvin Janis's research focused on? We didn't talk about this in class at all. This is something that you probably would have read. I mentioned it briefly, but I didn't go over it too much. It's like a whole column in the text. Janis talked about something called groupthink, and the focus on that is how, like, if you're in a group and there's a clear leader and you don't have a lot of time to make a decision, the emphasis is on group unity, not necessarily coming to the best decision. So if one person in the group is like, I don't think it's a good idea, they're not likely to say anything. Okay, let's take Riley for example, okay? Let's say that Riley, her mom died or something, right? Okay, so I've met your mom's not dead, right? Okay, good. Riley's like, woo! Like, oh, sorry. Okay, so let's say Riley's mom died, right? Then we've got Riley, the statuses that she holds now is, you know, daughter of a, so orphan, right? Orphan, student, female, worker if you have a job, whatever, okay, all those things. If her mom died like 2 months ago, which one of those is gonna be your master status probably? Orphan, right? Until she gets older, which one's gonna be your master status? No, I'd probably say orphan till you graduate high school and get on your own, right?
Yeah.
So, be able to like see a couple scenarios and evaluate examples of types of statuses. Okay, we did that a lot in class. There's like 6 questions like that, where you're presented a scenario with a person. You have to identify role, status, master status, all that stuff. Okay. All right. Okay, if you're in the commons at lunch, all the people in the commons together, what would they be referred to as? A crowd, yep. So what is something that could happen, what is something they could do to make them be a group then?
School shooting.
Oh, okay. So if there's a school shooting and then all of a sudden they're like, save us, and they start running around and tipping the tables over. Okay, or if like randomly somebody got in the speaker system and played the YMCA and everybody stood up and did YMCA together. Okay, now they're interacting with each other, they're working towards a common goal of being silly or whatever. So in that instance, they have now become a group. Okay, we also talked about Kohlberg's theory of moral development with the pre-conventional, conventional, and post-conventional level. In the pre-conventional level, what's the focus?
Feelings, what's good is good.
Yep, what they feel is good is good. In the conventional level, what's the focus?
Right.
Rules. So whatever, if there's a rule, if you break it, it's bad. If you follow it, it's good. And then in the post-conventional level, what's?
What's ethical?
Yeah, abstract principles. Good. Okay, we also talked about leadership styles. There's 3 of them.
Authoritarian, laissez-faire, and democratic.
Democratic, okay? Democratic, authoritarian, laissez-faire. So be able to identify and apply those. We also talked about elements of a bureaucracy. That's one of the essay questions that you guys had for take home, but there's a few questions about that. So like functionalists, right? Are they gonna think a bureaucracy is a good thing or a bad thing? A good, because they're necessary to make society function. So one of the main guys that talked about that, he's the primary guy for bureaucracy, is who? Who's the main guy for bureaucracies? That's Weber, but it's W, spelled with a W, but Weber. So remember the purple cards I gave you? Those were 6 elements of Weber's ideal bureaucracy. So we thought that they were good because they helped stuff to function better, basically. Okay, that's it. Like always, I always leave a few different things that I don't talk about. So there's a few things on here that you're just gonna get from the book, but they're on your sheet, so you'll have to kind of look at those on your own. Does anybody have any questions specifically?
Can we talk about some of the people?
You wanna talk about a few of the people?
Yeah, because I don't remember some of these.
Okay, sure.
Like, Peter.
You wanna push stop on that so that? Sure.
Your turn off.
It's the red button. It's gonna die, I think.